Chapter 14. The Legend of the Temple. From this account of the exploits of Abraham and his scholar Euclid, and of the invention of geometry, or masonry in Egypt, the legend of the craft proceeds, by a rapid stride, to the narrative of the introduction of the art into Judea, or as it is called in all of them, the land of behest, or the land of promise. Here it is said to have been principally used by King Solomon in the construction of the temple at Jerusalem. The general details connected with the building of this edifice, and the assistance given to the king of Israel by Hiram, king of Tyre, are related with sufficient historical accuracy, and were probably derived either directly or at a second hand through the Polychronicon from the first book of Kings, which, in fact, is referred to in all the manuscripts as a source of information. Footnote. As it is said in the Bible, in the third book of Kings, are the words of the Cook manuscript. In the canon of Scripture, as then used, the two books of Samuel were called the first and second of Kings. The third book of Kings was then the first according to the present canon. The assumption that Freemasonry, as it now exists, was organized at the Temple of Solomon, although almost universally accepted by Masons who have not made Masonry a historical study, but who derive their ideas of the institution from the mythical teachings of the ritual, has been utterly rejected by the greater part of the recent school of iconoclasts who investigate the history of Freemasonry by the same methods which they would pursue in the examination of any other historical subject. The fact, however, remains that in the legend of the craft, the temple is prominently and definitely referred to as a place where Masons congregated in great numbers, and where Masonry was confirmed or established, and whence it traveled into other countries. Footnote. And thus was that worthy science of Masonry confirmed in the country of Jerusalem and in many other kingdoms. Dowland manuscript. Considering the legend of the craft as merely a narrative of the rise and progress of architecture in its connection with a peculiar architectural association, it was natural that in such a narrative some reference should be made to one of the most splendid specimens of ancient architectural art that the ancient world had exhibited. And since this temple was, by its prominence in the ritual of Jewish worship, intimately connected with both the Jewish and Christian religions, we shall be still less surprised that an association not only so religious, but even ecclesiastical as medieval Masonry was, should have considered this sacred edifice as one of the cradles of its institution. Hence we find the Temple of Jerusalem occupying a place in the legend of the craft, which it has retained, with many enlargements, to the present day. But there is a difference in the aspect in which this subject of the temple is to be viewed, as we follow the progress of the order in its transition from an operative to a speculative institution. Originally referred to by the legendists as a purely historical fact, whose details were derived from Scripture, and connected by a sort of esprit du corps with the progress of their own association, it was retained during and after the development of the order into a speculative character, because it seemed to be the very best foundation on which the religious symbolism of that order could be erected. But notwithstanding that the masses of the institution, learned as well as unlearned, continue to accept the historical character of this part of the legend, the temple is chiefly to be considered in a symbolic point of view. It is in this aspect that we must regard it, and in so doing we shall relieve the legend of another charge of absurdity. It is true that we are unable now to determine how much of true history and how much of symbolism were contemplated by the authors of the legend when they introduced the Temple of Jerusalem into that document as a part of their traditional narrative. There is a doubt, and we cannot now positively assert that the medieval Freemasons had not some impression of a symbolic idea when they incorporated it into their history. The temple might, indeed, from its prominence in the ritual, be almost called the characteristic symbol of speculative Masonry. The whole system of Masonic symbolism is not only founded on the Temple of Jerusalem, but the temple idea so thoroughly permeates it that an inseparable connection is firmly established, so that if the temple symbol were obliterated and eliminated from the system of Freemasonry, if that system were purged of all the legends and myths that refer to the building of the Solomonic temple and to the events that are supposed to have then and there occurred, we should have nothing remaining by which to recognize and identify speculative Masonry as the successor of the operative system of the Middle Ages. The history of the Roman Empire, with no account of Julius Caesar, or of Pompey, or that of the French Revolution, with no allusion to Louis XVI, or to Robespierre, would present just as mutilated a narrative as Freemasonry would, were all reference to the Temple of Solomon omitted. Seeing, then, the importance of this symbol, it is proper and will be interesting to trace it back through the various exemplars of the legend of the craft contained in the old constitutions, because it is to that legend that modern Freemasonry owes the suggestion, at least, if not the present arrangement and formulae, of this important symbol. In the oldest constitution that we have, the one known as the Hallowell manuscript, whose date is supposed not to be later than the end of the 14th century, there is not the least allusion to the Temple of Solomon, which is another reason why I ascribe to that document, as I have before said, an origin different from that of the other and later manuscripts. The word temple occurs but once in the entire poem, and then it is used to designate a Christian church or place of worship. Footnote. He made the both hall and eke bowery, and he temples of great honor to sport him in both day and night, and to worship his God with all his might. Lines 63 through 66. But in the Cook manuscript, written, as it is estimated, about a century afterward, there are ample references to the Solomonic temple, and the statement made in the legend of the craft is for the first time enunciated. After this, there is not a constitution written in which the same narrative is not repeated. There does not appear in any of them, from the Lansdowne manuscript in 1560 to the Papworth in 1701, any enlargement of the narrative or any development of new occurrences. Each of them dilates in almost the same words, upon the Temple of Solomon, as connected with Masonry in many words, and gives elaborate details of the construction of the edifice, of the number of masons employed, how they were occupied in performing other works of masonry, and, finally, how one of them left Jerusalem and extended the art into other countries. We thus see that up to the end of the 17th century, the legend of the craft, in all its essential details, continued to be accepted as traditionary history. In the beginning of the 18th century, the legend began to assume a nearer resemblance to its present form. The document already referred to as the Krauss manuscript, and which Dr. Krauss too hastily supposed was a copy of the original York constitutions of 926, is really, as I have heretofore shown, a production of the early part of the 18th century. In this document, the legend is given in the following words.